The golden shackles of Blackwood Creek, a daughter's flight. In the deep, rolling hills of the Pacific Northwest, there's a place called Blackwood Creek. To the folks driving by on the highway, it looks like a postcard, a perfect, quiet community of farmers and craftsmen, living a simple, God-fearing life. But inside those white picket fences, there was a tradition that turned my stomach since the day I could walk. We called it the binding. In Blackwood, a girl wasn't a person. She was an asset. The moment you turned 16, you were bound to a man selected by the elders. It didn't matter if he was 40, 50, or 60. It didn't matter if you'd never spoken a word to him. The elders said it was for the sanctity of the bloodline, but even at 10 years old, I knew it was just a fancy way of saying we were being sold. I remember my older sister, Sarah. She was the light of my life. She was 17, with dreams of being a nurse, reading medical books she'd hide under her floorboards. Then came her binding day. I watched them drape a heavy, iron-threaded shawl over her shoulders. She looked at me, her eyes screaming for help, but our mother just held her down, whispering that this was the highest honor. 3 months later, Sarah was gone. They said it was a failing of the heart, but the whispers in the laundry room said her husband had a temper that left marks no shawl could hide. That was the night I decided I would never be bound. To the world, I was the perfect daughter. I kept my head down, I baked the bread, I sang the hymns. But in the dark, I was a different person. I started a secret history club in the old tool shed behind the orchard. It wasn't about history, though. I'd managed to snag a few discarded magazines and a shattered smartphone I found in a ditch by the main road. I charged it using a hand-crank lantern I'd modified. There were 6 of us, girls ranging from 12 to 15. I showed them pictures of women in the city. Women who were doctors, pilots, and teachers. I taught them the words that would make the elders skin crawl, words like autonomy, consent, and illegal. We practiced our outside voices, the way people talked on the news. We rehearsed what we would say if we ever saw a state trooper. I am being held against my will. This is a human rights violation. We whispered those sentences like they were holy prayers. Then, the clock ran out. I turned 16. My father came into my room at dawn, his face like granite. "Cora," he said, his voice echoing in the small space. "The elders have looked upon you with favor. You are to be bound to Silas Vance." Silas. He was 62. He'd had 4 wives before me. None of them lasted more than 5 years. "I'm honored, Father," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack. I bowed my head, hiding the fire in my eyes. The ceremony was set for 3 days later. In Blackwood, they don't give you time to think. They want you overwhelmed by the glory of it all. My mother began sewing the binding shawl, her fingers moving with a terrifying mechanical precision. She kept telling me how lucky I was, how Silas had the biggest orchard in the valley. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just waited. The night before the ceremony, I slipped out to the tool shed. I gave my smartphone, the only window to the real world we had, to little Mia. She was only 12, and her binding was years away. "Keep teaching them," I whispered, clutching her small hands. "If I make it, I'm coming back for every single one of you." The morning of the binding was cold and gray. The whole community gathered in the great hall. I was dressed in a stiff, white linen gown, my hair braided tight. Silas stood at the altar, his eyes trailing over me like I was a piece of prize livestock. The elders began the chant. My father stepped forward to drape the iron shawl over my shoulders. This was the moment. Once that shawl touched you, the community considered you, legally, his. I waited until his hands were inches from my neck. Then, I didn't just run. I exploded. I dove between the elders, kicking over the ceremonial brazier. Hot coals scattered across the wooden floor, and for a split second, the shock froze them. I bolted through the side door, the one that led to the kitchen. "Get her!" My father's roar shook the walls. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the kitchen, grabbing a heavy rolling pin and smashing the window above the sink. I tumbled out, glass slicing into my palms, but the adrenaline was a deafening roar in my ears. I knew the woods behind the hall better than anyone. I'd spent years mapping the deer trails. I heard the heavy boots of the peacekeepers, the community's enforcers, crashing through the brush behind me. "Cora, stop now and the mercy will be swift," one of them shouted. I didn't want mercy. I wanted the highway. It was 3 miles of dense forest and steep ravines. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. I could hear their dogs now, the low, rhythmic baying of hounds. They were closing in. I reached the Devil's Slide, a steep, muddy embankment that led down to the creek. I didn't slow down. I sat and slid, the mud coating my white dress, thorns tearing at my skin. I hit the water at the bottom with a bone-chilling splash. The current was fast, swollen by the spring rains. I let it take me. I floated, feet first, bouncing off rocks, my head barely above the surface. I heard the dogs at the top of the slide, their barking fading as the water pulled me around the bend. A mile downstream, I hauled myself out, shivering so hard I could barely stand. I was a mile from the highway now. I could hear the faint thrum-thrum of tires on asphalt. It sounded like music. I reached the road just as a massive semi-truck was barreling down the lane. I didn't wave. I threw myself into the middle of the road. The screech of the brakes was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, jumped out, his face pale. "Kid, what are you doing? You almost unalived yourself." I looked at him, my mud-caked face streaked with tears and blood. I used my outside voice. The one I'd practiced in the shed. "My name is Cora Thorne. I am 16 years old. I am escaping a forced marriage and physical abuse. Please, take me to the nearest police station." The driver didn't ask questions. He saw the white dress, the bruises, and the sheer, raw terror in my eyes. He hauled me into the cab and locked the doors. As we pulled away, I saw my father's black truck crest the hill. He stopped, watching us disappear into the distance. He didn't follow. He knew, once I was on that highway, I wasn't property anymore. I was a citizen. The next few months were a whirlwind of cold offices and bright lights. The police took my statement. Then the FBI got involved. It turns out, the binding wasn't just a quirky tradition, it was human trafficking. My father tried to fight it. He hired high-priced lawyers who talked about religious freedom and cultural heritage. They tried to paint me as a mentally unstable girl who had delusions of grandeur. My mother even went on the local news, weeping, saying I'd been brainwashed by outsiders. But then, I wasn't the only one who spoke up. The history club had worked. Mia and the others had taken the lessons to heart. When the authorities raided Blackwood Creek, 5 other girls came forward with their own stories. They showed the investigators the hidden smartphones, the secret maps, and the marks left by the peacekeepers. The day of the trial, I stood in that courtroom, wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, things I was once told were tools of the devil. I looked my father in the eye. He didn't look like granite anymore. He looked like a small, angry man who had lost his grip on the world. "You have no daughter," he hissed at me as they led him away in handcuffs. "You are dead to us, Cora. You're a ghost." I smiled at him. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a peaceful one. "If being free means being a ghost," I said, my voice steady, "then I'm happy to be haunted." Today, I live in a small apartment in Seattle. I'm 18 now, and I'm finishing my nursing degree, just like Sarah wanted to. Every Friday, I volunteer at a shelter for runaway teens. I tell them my story, and I see the light flicker back on in their eyes. The golden shackles are gone. My hands are scarred, and my family name is a curse in the valley, but every morning when I wake up and choose what I want to wear, what I want to eat, and who I want to talk to, I know I made the right choice. I'm not an asset. I'm not a tradition. I'm Cora, and I'm finally, truly, bound to no one but myself.